Okay, so today we're jumping into a really fascinating, almost sci-fi question. Is there some kind of hidden constitution that's quietly governing our entire planet?
I mean, really think about it for a second. We talk all the time about global trade, human rights, climate change. All these things seem to operate under rules that are above any single country. So what's the glue holding it all together? Is there some kind of unwritten global rulebook that we just don't see?
Now, before your mind starts racing to secret world governments or some ancient document locked away in a vault, let me just stop you right there. That is not what we're talking about. The reality is actually way more subtle, and honestly, a lot more interesting.
The real answer to this mystery isn't a secret document, but a really powerful idea: global constitutionalism. It's the concept that helps us make sense of how rules and power are being organized on a global scale.
So what on earth is it? Well, put simply, global constitutionalism is the idea that the basic principles we use to organize our own countries, things like human rights and the rule of law, are starting to pop up on the international stage. It's all about taking those foundational building blocks and applying them to the whole world.
And when we say constitutional qualities, we're talking about the big stuff. Things like separating powers so no one gets too powerful, protecting fundamental human rights, and making sure the rule of law wins out over somebody's random whim. These are the absolute essentials for any constitutional system.
Okay, and this is a really crucial distinction to make. Global constitutionalism is not about creating a single world constitution. Not at all. It's a process, a slow, gradual trend where global governance starts to look and act more constitutional. Think of it as an evolution, something growing from the bottom up, out of treaties and institutions, not a command from the top down.
So, a pretty fair question at this point is, why now, right? What's pushing our world in this direction? Well, it turns out there are three major forces really driving this whole thing.
First, you've got globalization. With money, information, and people zipping across borders easier than ever, our world is basically shrinking. Second, you have the rise of these powerful international groups like the UN or the WTO, bodies that make and enforce their own rules. And third, let's be honest, we're facing enormous global problems, climate change, pandemics, that no single country, no matter how powerful, can fix on its own.
Okay, so enough theory. Where do we actually see this in action? Let's dive into our first case study, the World Trade Organization. It's a perfect, and pretty controversial, example of how these constitutional ideas play out in the real world.
This is a real tug-of-war. On one hand, the argument that the WTO has constitutional features is pretty strong. It's got a formal structure, its rules are binding, and it has this powerful system for settling disputes that was once called the crown jewel of international law. But the arguments on the other side are just as powerful. It wasn't born out of some big constitutional moment. Its power is stuck strictly in the world of trade, and this is a big one. It doesn't protect human rights like a true constitution is supposed to. So if the WTO is sorta an example, where can we find the gold standard of this whole idea? Well, that would bring us to the European Union. It's widely seen as the most advanced example of this constitutionalization process anywhere outside of a single nation.
And yeah, there's not a lot of debate about this one. In the world of international law, the EU is the undisputed champion. It has gone way further than any other international body in creating a real, functioning, constitutional-style order.
So how in the world did the EU pull this off? Well, the first key is a principle called the doctrine of primacy. And let me tell you, this is a complete game changer. It means, quite simply, that if a country's own national law clashes with EU law wins, period. It creates this clear legal hierarchy, a lot like how federal law sits above state law in the US.
The second key is the doctrine of direct effect, and it's just as radical. What this means is that a regular person, say a farmer over in France, can walk into their own local French court and actually use EU law to challenge their own government. It's incredible. It takes these abstract international treaties and turns them into actual enforceable rights for individuals.
And the list just keeps going. The EU has its own Bill of Rights, basically. It has a clear separation of powers between its different branches. It has a super powerful court that acts a lot like a Supreme Court. And it even has direct democratic elections for its parliament. When you add it all up, the EU pretty much ticks all the boxes of a constitutional system. Okay, so after digging into the theory and looking at the evidence, what's the final verdict here? What does all this talk about a hidden global constitution really mean for us?
I think the biggest takeaways is that this whole constitutionalization thing isn't an all-or-nothing game.
It's a spectrum, right? On one end, you've got the WTO, which you could call constitutional-ish. It's got some of the features, but it's very limited. But on the other end, you have the EU, which is highly constitutionalized, a deep, complex system that really does look and feel like a national constitutional order.
So here it is, the most crucial point to walk away with. We are not heading towards a single, formal world constitution. That's a myth. But the process of constitutionalization, the slow, steady injection of these principles into how the world is governed, that is absolutely real, and it is fundamentally reshaping where power lies on our planet.
And that leaves us with one final, huge question to think about. As we face bigger and scarier global challenges, from pandemics to climate change, is this trend something we actually need more of? Or does it pose a threat to the power of individual nations? The answer to that is probably going to define the rest of the 21st century.